so good morning, everybody. My name is Jesse, and I am your virtual adventure guide here with Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants. Now, if you're joining us for the first time today, we are all about bringing conservation, adventure, and science into classrooms around the world through like a gazillion live free interactive broadcasts. I think we've done like 70 since mid-September, so it's been a crazy time. We never sleep. It's a really fun adventure every single day, getting to share the coolest people and places on this planet with you through this program. Quick note too for all our audience that all our programs are on our YouTube channel. So if you're tuning in for the very first time today, you can check out a library of over 2,500 programs that we've done over our last 7 years. Now, my favorite topic is conservation. I grew up in the Toronto area. I'm now joining you from Newfoundland, and across this country, I love the opportunity to hear from people that are working to save and protect Canada's incredible species and wildlife. And so today, we wanted you to all have that experience as well with Emma Pascoe. She is a biologist with Environment and Climate Change Canada, and today she's going to talk to us a little about the Species at Risk Act, the way that we help protect some of these iconic and incredible creatures coast to coast to coast. So I'm excited to dive in. I can't wait for your questions at the end of the broadcast. And without further ado, Emma, thank you so much for joining us today on the program.
Hi, everyone.
Awesome. Well, welcome in. I know you've got a great presentation for us, so let's dive in. YouTube groups, if you guys want to share questions or comments as we go through this program in the chat bar, please do. But Emma, take us away, and can't wait to get started.
Awesome. So let's get this going. So everyone's got my screen. I'm Emma, as Jesse said. I'm calling you guys here from Ottawa. I can jump right into my introduction to this presentation. I wanted to introduce myself a little bit first. I work for the Government of Canada. I work in the Environment and Climate Change Department. I also grew up in Toronto, but now I'm living here in Ottawa in the capital city, and I've actually lived in lots of different places all over Canada. I love nature. I love going for a walk in the forest or along the coast, and just getting really excited about what I see. And I'm really lucky that I get to make this my whole job. So I've got some pictures up here of different places where I've lived. That's Victoria, BC up at the top. Here's the Ottawa River down at the bottom. I've spent time all over Canada. It would be really hard for me to pick a favorite ecosystem or species from the places that I've lived. So to start off, I want to introduce you guys to these two words, ecosystem and species, just in case they're new to you, and talk about what really is a species at risk. So to put it in a way that I think I'm hopeful we can all understand, think for a minute, what would be the difference between these two species that I've got up here? I've got a dinosaur and I've got a bird. And I would say there are, a lot of things that would be different about them, particularly their size. But the main difference is that the dinosaurs aren't here anymore. Whereas this sparrow, you can see, anytime, pretty much almost anytime you look out the window, no matter where you are in the country. So that's what we're talking about when it comes to species at risk. With the dinosaurs, they, millions and millions of years ago, there was a catastrophic event and the dinosaurs are no longer here. So they went extinct. So when we talk about species at risk, we're talking about species who are at risk of not being here anymore. So with the dinos, this obviously wasn't caused by humans because we weren't there yet. But in my job, we're worried about the things that humans can do to affect the ecosystem. Next word we got to define is ecosystem. So this is the main thing I want you guys to take away from this presentation. If you walk away with nothing else, the fun facts are going to be awesome, but I want you to walk away knowing that all species play a part in the ecosystem. An ecosystem, if we break down the words, ecosystem, we're talking about how do things work in the natural world. So we're talking about everything in the environment that makes up this place. We're talking about the trees, and we've got some ducks there. There's probably a squirrel or two, but we're also talking about the water and the soil and even these dead leaves that have fallen here. All of this makes up an ecosystem. And ecosystem scientists like me are interested in more than just these individual creatures. We want the ecosystem to be as healthy as possible. And so this usually means making sure that as many species as possible are kind of left to their own devices to be able to thrive. Thrive is a good way to put it. So we've learned what a species is. I should clarify for you guys. What I'm saying species instead of plant or animal, because we're talking about both. When we're talking about a species at risk, it could be a gigantic animal, or it can be a little bug, or it can be a plant, it could even be a fungus. So the species is sort of our catch-all term for all of those. So now that we've learned what a species and an ecosystem are, let's dive into some of the work that we do. I first want to introduce you to some of our celebrities. So take a second and think for yourselves, what do we think of when we hear species at risk in Canada? And it's okay if the first ones that come to mind are these big, charismatic, funky animals that I was just talking about. So if we've got an image in our minds.
Yeah, polar bear is the image in my mind because it's pretty much the icon of conservation. It's sort of our iconic, our major species. I think that a lot of our students will think of.
Jesse and I did not plan this.
Hey!
There is our first species right here, our polar bear. They are gorgeous. They are adorable. He's got his little tongue out there. We did not plan this. I'm sure a lot of you guys thought about polar bear. I bet some other people thought about orcas. Beautiful, majestic. This picture, I think, was taken off the coast of BC by the Deception Pass Foundation organization. Just absolutely gorgeous creatures. And we know they're having a lot of trouble, specifically when it comes to boats. There are all these different creatures that we like to call our celebrity creatures because it's really easy to care about them. Here's a really cute little owl with its sweet little face. Here's a gorgeous monarch butterfly, really striking. These species are majestic and they're beautiful. They're cute. If they weren't here, we'd feel pretty sad. And we do have to care about them. But part of my job as a species at risk biologist is taking care of the species that aren't just fuzzy and cute. So before I introduce you to some of our less famous celebrities, the guys who you wouldn't see walking the red carpet, I want to talk for a sec to remind you why this matters. So I mentioned before, all species play a part in the ecosystem. So if one wasn't there, even if it wasn't one of the cute and fuzzy ones, it's going to cause some problems. Maybe an animal wouldn't have something to eat, or it wouldn't have somewhere to live. They all have this role to play. And so if one disappears, it's not good for anybody. So our first lesser famous celebrity I'm going to introduce you to are some snakes. And I know they seem scary. In our Hollywood movies, they're always the villains, right? But they are beautiful and majestic creatures. They eat mice and rats, all the kind of creatures that we would consider pests and might carry diseases. You might not think about a snake having a nest like a bird or a den like a bear, but they do actually have their own place where they like to be cozy. It's called a hibernacula, rhymes with Dracula. And these nests are something that, these hibernacula are something that species at risk biologists study and try to protect to help keep our snakes safe. So these aren't our next species at risk. These pictures aren't of the species who are at risk, but I'm putting them here because they have something in common with our next species. We've got some bungee jumpers and we've got some engineers. And I'm going to show you what they have in common with our next species, which is the woodpecker. So there's a whole bunch of different species of woodpeckers, and I know our image of them in our mind, right? We see the tree, we see the pole, we see the woodpeckers tap, 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 tapping, and they're boring into that tree and they're looking to dig out some bugs. But there are actually a lot of different species of woodpeckers. And not only do they do that, classic boring into a tree, they can also fly catch, which is what the red-headed woodpecker does. It's a lot like bungee jumping. He waits on his perch. If he sees a bug, he jumps up and he catches it in midair, which is pretty cool, pretty specialized. I'm certainly too nervous to go bungee jumping. I've never done it. Williamson sapsuckers are kind of like engineers because they have a really creative way of getting their food. They don't just bore into a tree and search for bugs. They've got these tiny little beaks. They make a hole in a tree and let the sap trickle out. It's all sticky like maple syrup, and it traps the bugs for them, and then they can come back and eat the bugs. So it's pretty creative. It's pretty cool. So it's not even just, there's this incredible diversity of life in these ecosystems with even just one type of bird. The final less famous celebrity I'll introduce you to is very, very tiny. So picture if you've ever gone for a walk in the woods and you've seen that fuzzy green stuff covering the trees. And it's really fun. It's really fuzzy looking. You kind of want to touch it. You can, but it's actually its own species in its own right. And it also needs to be protected. So these are mosses and lichens. Mosses and lichens are really important because they can indicate to us when the air is clean, because they're very sensitive to toxins, to certain poisons that would be in the air. So they can be useful in sites where something has gone on, like maybe mining or digging, and the air isn't so healthy. They can show us, they can teach us something about how healthy that air is. And lichens in particular are really cool. And this is one of my favorite biological phenomenons. They do something called symbiosis, and it's basically a partnership. So we've got an algae. If you've got a fish tank, you might see green scum on the side. That green stuff is algae. It's like a plant. And they've also got a fungus. If anybody here likes mushrooms on their pizza as much as I do, you'll recognize a fungus. That's like a mushroom. And they're very different species, but they actually live together as one organism. And they work together to get energy from the sun and to grow. So they're really, really cool. So as tiny as these creatures are, they also play a part in the ecosystem. So we're coming back to this slide. I have a slightly different ecosystem for you here. This is a beautiful alpine forest and meadow in Banff. And I'm just reminding you guys that it's really important that all the species in the ecosystem are there. They all help each other and they all help us. And there are a lot of things in the world lately that make it difficult for all these species to be there. So rather than getting down in the dumps, I want to talk to you guys about what can we do. I'll talk to you a bit about what I do in my job with as a biologist, and I'll talk to you a bit about what you guys can do, because you don't have to be a biologist or work for the government in order to make a difference. So the first thing I'm going to show you is that in Canada, we have a Species at Risk Act. We call it SARA for short. If there's anyone here named Sarah, you can feel a little bit special. I'm a biologist that works on a team of people in the government that make sure that this Species at Risk Act is being followed correctly. Now, it was published in 2002, and it was designed to help species, remember that's both plants and animals, who are struggling. SARA's a law, and so that means that people who hurt a species of risk can get in trouble. My specific job at Environment and Climate Change Canada is that I'm part of this team, and we make our whole job out of asking scientific questions to figure out what is going on with these different species at risk. So as much fun it is for me to go out for a nature walk, mostly I do that on my spare time. You can usually find me right here at my desk, and I help edit and review recovery documents. So when a species gets added to this SARA list, we have to put together a recovery document that talks about what the species is, how does it live, what is threatening to make it go extinct, to make it not be here anymore, and what we can do. So I work in the capital city, so I'm not an expert on any just one species. I work with the experts who write these documents. We bring them all together here on my computer, and I help work to make sure that these documents use the best science and are written in the best way to help others, with, of course, my trusty owl friend Bernard. So I talked about threats, what's threatening to make these species go extinct. And that's usually our first question when we're looking to recover a species. And we categorize these threats. We've got this international number system. We've got specialists who decide how strong each threat is, how much of a danger it is to these species. And there are lots of different types of threats. So some of these I think you might recognize. I've got a picture here of the threat of logging and wood harvesting. That's one of the ones in our numbered system. And this would be a problem for species who live in the forest, and it means their habitat's just not there anymore if we take away too many of those trees. We've got pollution, that's threat category number 9 with our subcategory of sewage. I've got a yucky looking picture over here. And not only there's, taking away of a species home is definitely something that is going to threaten it, but their home could still be there and just have something in it that makes them sick. And so that's also something that we try and study. What's if it's a species living in the water? Is the water looking all yucky? And this is kind of an interesting one that I don't know if too many people would necessarily have linked, because it's easy to think about just your home not being there or getting sick in your home. But in ecosystems, not only can things be out of balance if something isn't there, sometimes a species can get introduced to an ecosystem, and that's going to throw us out of balance as well. So people, this happens a lot in the water, which is why I've got a water example, because our waterways are so connected. a species who's a big predator can get into the ecosystem. In this case, we've got this specific type of carp. And this carp here is in rivers and lakes in Ontario. They compete with the native fish to get food, so the native fish get hungry. They bring diseases, they can alter the habitat. So we really need to make sure that when we as humans are interacting with our world, we're not upsetting the balances too much. So as biologists, we can help working on removing these threats. And I've gotten some pictures from my coworkers who do spend a lot more time out in the field. And they'll do things. We've got my coworker Lee's holding a frog over here. This is one of my few pictures out in the field for work. Usually I just go out for fun. I'm visiting a national park. National parks and we've got provincial parks too, but since I work for the government of Canada, I can speak more to the national parks. This is where we'll take a chunk of this habitat where species live, and we're going to protect it. We're going to say you can't do any logging here. You can't do certain activities here that are going to make the habitat yucky. Some of you might have been to some of these parks. I know some people are joining from Alberta. You guys have Banff. That's a really big one. I'm hanging out over here on a park that's close to Lake Erie. We've got a bunch of those there. Beautiful parks all over the country. So habitats are protected here. And I've also got a picture of a road because I want to bring you up to speed on some of the latest conservation science. Not only are habitats protected in these parks, conservation biologists, ecosystem scientists, all of the people who I work with, we're learning that it's really important to make sure that these habitats are connected to each other. So think about your own habitat and the places where you live and what bring you what you need in order to thrive. Let's say, we've got home, that's where we're cozy. We've got our bed, we've got our living room. We've got the grocery store, that's where we go when we get our food. We've got school. I know school gives you homework, but school also gives you other really fun things like a chance to learn, a chance to see your friends. How do you guys get from place to place? My guess is a lot of you take the roads. And so when we're protecting habitats for these species at risk, the latest conservation science tells us that it's really important to make sure that these habitats have some kind of a pathway to them. So a frog wouldn't necessarily hop along a road, but he would benefit from, a little pathway of wooded area to get from place to place. This is something cool that we're starting to learn about in the last couple of years. I've got another picture here of some invasive species. This is a weed called Phragmites. It's found all over the place in Ontario, and it overgrows everything. And so a lot of biologists are going in and helping actually pulling out those weeds right from the roots. And that's something major that really helps these species at risk. Got another slide here, one more slide of some pictures of other things that biologists do. And not only do we help remove the threats, but it's really, really important for us to keep track of how this ecosystem is doing. So here are some more photos from my coworkers. We've got one of my coworkers is putting a little bracelet on a bird. It's called a band. They get a little bracelet. We catch them, we let them go. And that bracelet helps us track to see where those birds go. Because the tricky thing with conserving birds is their habitat isn't always in one place. A lot of them migrate, right? You think of Canada geese going south for the winter. That's kind of our famous example. A lot of different birds do that. So we need to know where they're going so we can know how to protect them. Here's my coworker using something called a quadrat. It's square. And he's counting how many different plants and other species are in there. And that lets us get some information about how healthy this ecosystem is to tell us how many different species are living there. And of course, we get to play with cute animals too. Here's a couple of my coworkers holding some turtles. They're checking up on those. That would be something I would really want to do if I got my next project, because I would like to play with some turtles. So you might be wondering, does this work? The answer is yes. There are a lot of different stories lately where biologists have done this research. And people have helped them go into these areas and clean them up and reintroduce these species. I've got a beautiful picture of a fox here and also a mottled dusky wing butterfly. That one I happen to know they just released some of those in Ontario recently. And these reintroductions, these bringing these species back into a nice healthy habitat are going pretty well. So there is hope. It's sometimes we hear these sad stories and we're worried about these sweet, adorable animals. But if we all do our part, they're able to do okay. So going back to my point that I'm trying to make sure you guys really take home about how all species play a part in the ecosystem. You guys are species in this ecosystem, and you guys can also play a part. And I want to talk to you about some things that you guys can do. So my first recommendation is to learn a bit more about the species that interest you. So this is what happens to these recovery documents that my coworkers all over the country write and I help edit and process. They end up on this website. It's the Government of Canada Species at Risk Registry. And you can look up species all over the country. I've got some pictures here. Who do we have? We've got the woodpecker. We've got this really cool species of dragonfly that can actually, its scales can change color when it gets really warm from basking in the sun. And we've got a nice sweet fuzzy moss there. You can learn about the species that are in your area and who you might need to look out for. It's not necessarily, the most fun reading the way a comic book would be. So I always recommend people to go to the library. And they've got lots of books there on species that might be interesting to you. I know this is how I got involved in my job when I was a kid. I was just so excited to learn about all the cool different things happening around the world. In my day, there was the Magic School Bus. I don't know if that show's still around, but it's amazing. There's so many exciting ways to learn about these species. And once you've learned about them, you can also join a community of science event. So those pictures of my coworkers that I had up there where they were putting a little bracelet on the birds, or they were maybe pulling out weeds, or they were going and counting what species were around. You don't have to be a biologist to do this. Anybody can help out. So the Government of Canada has got a citizen science portal. I think we like to call it community science these days because it just feels a little friendlier. And you can go, I can leave your teachers with these websites so that you can go in and take a look and see if there's activities happening near you, which is pretty cool. And not even just that, you guys can take a walk in your neighborhood and you can bring your phone. So this is a walk in my neighborhood that I just took. This is a wood duck. At first glance, you might be like, oh yeah, it's just another duck, but he's got these really cool markings. I know this one's a he because his colors are really bright and that's how they attract their mates. And I learned that this is different from just a regular duck because I also use this app. It's really fun. It's called iNaturalist. And you can take pictures of species that you see and it'll tell you what the actual name is of that species. So you can go, oh, it's a duck. It'll tell you it's a wood duck. It's a mallard. It's a blue teal. It's very exciting, I think. You can share which species you found in your area. And then these findings go to scientists all over the world, and it helps keep track of which species are where. So if you remember before I talked about with the birds migrating, sometimes it's a little bit hard to know where they went. This helps us keep track of them. So even just going for a walk in your neighborhood with your phone, you guys get to be able to help species at risk, which is pretty cool. And the final slide that I've got here for what you can do, and I'll pause a little bit to let you guys do some thinking and maybe share if possible. I'll let Jesse keep track of that. Every small everyday action that you do that makes the environment a healthy place helps species at risk. I've got a recycle bin here. We all know that recycling is important. We know that not using, trying to use as little plastic as we possibly can really helps all of our critters. I've got a picture of this goofy cat here. This is my brother's cat. I snuck her in. And one of the new things that we're actually recommending to people is that if your cat goes outdoors, we really want to make sure that it's not taking down birds. Yeah. And so this cat, whose name is Cat, she is purely an indoor cat. People who do have their cat go outdoors, it's important to watch them if they're on the deck. That's a really small everyday thing that people can do. Have you guys been doing maybe some brainstorming? Does anyone have some ideas about other things that we can do?
This is always our favorite question for our audience. And so we get litterless lunches is one that a lot of our school kids, of course, do. Now, I remember growing up where that was like the first time that was really being addressed in schools. And now like everybody does it all around the globe. The idea of just bringing stuff where you don't create any waste. In fact, don't waste in general is something that we hear from a lot of classrooms. It's such a great message, whether it's emissions, whether it's plastic, whether it's food, all these things go a really long way. We get food comments quite regularly about the idea that if you don't throw out food, you're saving all the emissions that would have been made to create that food. You're taking it in. I mean, about 30% of all food in Canada is thrown in the garbage, which is astonishing and terrible. And so we can all take action and shop more frequently and smaller amounts so that we don't have that impact on the planet. So the good thing, Emma, is that kids these days live and breathe this stuff. They know all the facts. They're so in and they're so vested. They're really doing an amazing job of really enacting these solutions in a really broad way. So I love that.
I'm so happy to hear it.
Awesome.
So we can think about those, think about all of these, and I'm going to leave you guys off before we pop over to do questions, because I really want to remind you of our key message. All these species play a part in the ecosystem. I've put up this last photo of an ocean ecosystem, and I lied to you guys at the beginning when I said I couldn't pick a favorite. Ocean ecosystems have always been my favorite. They're the most mysterious and magical, I think, because we can't see what these species, urchins, sponges, we can't see what these guys are doing until we dig a little deeper. So I hope I've inspired you guys to dig a little bit deeper, and I'm really looking forward to hearing your questions.
We are going to go get our shovels and dig deeper immediately, Emma. That was spectacular. Well, thank you so much. If you want to come out of screen share so you can see us again, we'll have a bit of a conversation. That would be awesome. And I'll just note some of those things that you were sharing. So again, science.gc.ca. I'll make sure all our registered classes have this link at the end of the broadcast. Some amazing stuff there, including, of course, their citizen science stuff that Emma so beautifully talked about. And then iNaturalist and Seek. So these are like the coolest tools of all time. We use them for our backyard bio initiative in May in a huge way. So I can't encourage you enough. If you're an older kid, look up iNaturalist. Younger kids or family, Seek is a great tool, sort of the younger kids spin-off of iNaturalist, which is a really fantastic platform as well. And citizen science in general, I know it's not our government of Canada, but Zooniverse has the greatest repository of all the citizen science projects in the world. So if you're keen on that, if you want to go hunt meteors or help species or do any number of things, all online at Zooniverse. Emma, that was so much fun. What a cool presentation. And thank you for showing us, especially some of the lesser known species. So you talked about charismatic species, and the charismatic megafauna is a term some of our students might be familiar with, these polar bears and orcas and these big, beautiful, cuddly things that we all really affiliate with. Do we find challenges with helping or people trying to save something like a snake that they might be afraid of, or a bat or a spider? Like, what do you run into? Do you run into problems when you're trying to get people convinced to save these creatures?
We do. And you know what? It's mostly. Oh, I've got the sun in my face. I'm just leaning back a little bit here. It's hard to be interested in doing something to save a creature that you don't really know anything about. And I've definitely got some fears of creatures. For me, I don't like little tiny bugs that are creepy crawly all over the place. I don't like that. But having the understanding that all of these creatures play a part in our ecosystem and are important just in their own right, it really goes a long way to help people get excited about taking care of these species. So while I'm not a fan of mosquitoes, but there are these creatures who even if we're not a fan of them, they're here, and we owe it to all these creatures to take care of them.
And I really like that message. I mean, you can come up with practical reasons for saving species, and it helps be the linchpin of the ecosystem, or it's important for the XYZ thing. But these species have a right to exist in and of themselves, and I think that whether it's the beauty that we get from them or the fact that they've been here for millions of years, and what right of ours is it to impact them in such a negative way that they're endangered or go extinct. And I think that's a really important thing. For me, centipedes, by the way, I love all creatures. I don't like how centipedes, too many legs, move too quickly. But if centipedes were endangered, I would absolutely be the first person to not kill them, take them outside and help protect them. And I think that that's a really important message for our kids. So thank you for that. I'm curious on this is a question we get in every broadcast of all time. So Is there a favorite animal of yours? I mean, we talked about some least favorite ones. Is there something that really, best animal of all time ever, or not?
So I do have a favorite, and it's another one of those symbiotic species where two different creatures are sort of living together to create one, and we can't find them in Canada. So there is that sort of caveat. Well, we can find them a little bit in Canada. My favorite are corals. So we do have some corals in Canada. We have cold water corals. And these are animals that are very closely related to a jellyfish. They look a lot like an upside down jellyfish. They're kind of like a little cup like this. And we get some of the ones that live in cold waters off the coast of, I actually don't know if we get them in the Arctic Ocean, but certainly Atlantic and Pacific, so two of our coasts. But in warmer places, these corals can have this relationship with, I like to call it the algae buddy. But essentially, it's a very special type of algae. So remember our little green things that we see in our fish tanks, and they live together and work together. And the algae takes in energy from the sun like a plant and shares that energy with the coral. And then the coral is able to release this sort of chalky substance, and it builds an entire reef. So you guys have probably seen pictures of coral reefs, oh, we've got zooxanthellae, there we go. That's what they are.
I have to bring it up while you were talking about it so people can look up the name after the fact, but it's so cool. Like, it's the best.
I think they are so awesome. And so one of my favorite fun facts to tell people is that those beautiful coral reefs that you see in those gorgeous pictures of tropical islands, they're not plants. They're a plant and an animal together. So I think that is just awesome.
It really is. We've got 2 coral programs coming up in November. We're actually one of the first things in the whole entire month is Hope for Coral. So you talked about the fact that positive conservation stories are really important to share with kids and get people excited that they feel that there is a future for these things. We've got a Hope for Coral program. We're bringing back some amazing coral reefs in Indonesia and other places around the globe, so people can check that out.
Okay, I'm going to call in.
Call in, the more the merrier. Our special link for that is below. So it's a special series with all positive stories of conservation. But I'm going to go completely off the reservation here for a minute with symbiosis. You talked about lichen. One of my favorite stories in the world of nature is that if you go to Antarctica's dry valley, so there's like the most inhospitable part of the most inhospitable continent, where it's like 100-kilometer winds all the time and it's -50, and you crack open rocks, there are lichen that live inside those rocks, which is insane. They're called cryptoendoliths, like things that live inside rocks. It blows my mind. So I share your fondness for symbiosis, Emma. It's very, very cool.
It's awesome.
So you shared some threats earlier today. You shared invasive species, habitat loss, pollution. Is there a chief threat? You talked about the fact that they are sort of ranked on a scale or ranked by this consortium of people that know what they're doing. Is there like a biggest one that we should be concerned about in Canada or around the globe?
So I should clarify, just because this is really important. The threats aren't ranked. There isn't an A to Z. This is the most important threat. This is the one that we don't care about. What this is it's a list of all the possible threats that we could come up with, and it's different for every species. So that's one of the biggest challenges I would say as a conservation biologist is that there's no one size fits all approach. Every single species is reacting differently. A really great example is wind turbines. Wind turbines are wonderful in terms of green energy because we are not emitting any fossil fuels as we're just harvesting energy from the wind. But wind turbines aren't so great if you put one in an area where there are lots of birds and lots of bats. So we have to kind of balance and kind of weigh all these pros and cons when we're coming up with these plans. So there's a consortium of scientists. They get together, they decide based on the best available research that we have, which are the threats that are sort of this top issue for this one particular species at this time, and how can we start tackling that?
Yep.
And Jesse, if you don't mind if I add in one other thing,
please.
I would be remiss if I didn't talk about a very big threat, but in this case, it's one of the biggest threats about it is how unknown it is climate change.
Yes.
So I love hearing how aware people are. When I was in elementary school, climate change wasn't something that we talked about.
No.
But the idea that it's things that we as humans are doing that are affecting the atmosphere and are affecting the climate, it's causing a lot of problems for animals. In some cases, if plants and animals, I got to say, because often it starts with the trees. In some cases, trees aren't used, the tree that would grow in an environment that's normally nice and cool and wet, now it's getting really hot and dry. Those trees aren't growing there anymore. And that's a problem for the animals that live there. But the trouble is that this hasn't happened before, right? We've got these unprecedented levels of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, and these changes are new. And so we don't necessarily know the best way to help the species through this. So we're studying as much as we can, but it's definitely a big challenge for conservation biologists is to be able to fit in there. We've got the threat of the logging, and we've got pollution, but then on top of all of this, climate change is just involved in everything.
Yep. We have species biologists from all over the world, and every single time we have a person talking about conservation, climate change it's either the lead threat or it's a threat multiplier. It changes how we perceive, how we save species. We were talking on a program the other day about orcas are now extending their range further north. So you have this ultimate apex super predator in the ocean that's going to places that has never previously really been. And so creatures that never had to worry about being hunted by orca now are. How do you conserve that? How do you balance that? Orca themselves are endangered. I mean, these are really, really challenging questions, and it's why it's so important to research these things in such a big way.
Yeah.
I will note for our students, Environment and Climate Change Canada has climatekids.ca, which is a fantastic resource to learn about some of the impact of this. So I encourage everybody to check this out. And my two favorite resources, Drawdown and Regeneration, both books and both incredible web resource hubs, present this really fantastic, detailed, and positive view of the challenges that we face and some of the solutions that we can act as a species to help mitigate these things, including wind turbines. And I'm so glad, by the way, you took the opportunity to talk about the fact that they're great in so many ways, but do pose a risk. I will note, statistically speaking, because wind turbines get brought up in a lot of these conversations, your cat keeping it inside is a much better thing than any wind turbine elimination on the planet. I think the number one killer of birds on this, it's 300 billion a year or something. It's an absurd amount of birds are taken every single year by cats. And then windows is second, and then way, way down the list is wind turbines. So it's important. Don't put them in a migratory corridor, something we should be considering. But all things considered, net positive for all those wind turbines and solar panels that we can put in. So
yeah, they're awesome.
This is great. Time flies and you're having fun. We got time for a few more questions here. This is great. Corridors, you talked about this, and I love this topic. We've done partnerships with the Yellowstone to Yukon that does this incredible big corridor on a continent-wide scale. But earlier you talked about things crossing roads. Are there actions being taken by the federal government or in partnership with provincial governments, parks, what have you, to produce areas where creatures can cross that otherwise didn't exist? Is this something that you guys work on, or what's the deal?
Such a good question. This isn't something that me and my team personally work on, so I would love to have more information for you guys about which spots you could actually go to see these in action, but I don't. But I think I've, just in my personal life, come across a few of these where they'll, have a little bridge over top of a highway. And it's, it's planted with grass, and it makes it so that a car can't hurt a frog crossing over there. So as part of my job as an Environment and Climate Change Canada biologist, I personally don't have any information for you guys about where you could go find those. That would be awesome if people went out and explored and go find them. But personally, when I've been out and about, I've seen a couple of these. They're really cool.
They're really cool. So the two examples that I know about in Canada, actually Sudbury area, where we consistently have a lot of classes joining from in sort of middle Ontario. There's tons there to help protect turtles and snakes and other creatures. And then Banff National Park is actually the world example. Like when other countries around the world want to put in wildlife corridors, they go to Banff. They've been able to do amazing research contrasting it with Jasper. So two incredible parks, both in the Alberta area, and how much fewer wildlife collisions there are. So fewer impact on people, fewer injuries or deaths on the road for people, for animals. So many amazing creatures saved by virtue of having these corridors. So it saves so much money in the long run, and it really is a very impactful way to help save species. So very cool. Emma, one last question. I like this one very much. You talked about species that might be endangered that are again, not our charismatic megafauna like lichen or moss. How do you know if a moss is endangered? How do you know if any species is endangered? How do you possibly find this out? What's going on?
This is such a good question. This is a huge question. And again, it's too big of a question for me to have a full answer for you guys. But going back to the picture that I showed you guys where my coworkers and I are, we're kind of out in the field, we're doing these surveys. The best way to find out, or the only way that we can know if these species are in danger, is to go out and study them. Yep. So we have to go and count and take a look and see how many of these creatures are out and available. And then when we're talking about at risk, often we think of compared to what. Yeah. And so what we use as our standard when we're talking about when species, what would their natural state have been before humans came here and or humans came around and started really affecting them. We use that kind of 200-year benchmark of the sort of like industrialization timing. So before the advent of factories and massive roads and stuff, if there wasn't very much of that moss to begin with, then we're not super worried that there wasn't too much of it now. And we look at historical records, we look at, there's a lot of things that we can look at. But if we see, if there's some species that we do know the birds are a really, really well-studied group of creatures. And we can see, over the last, we've got data from 100 years of a bird was seen in this area, a bird was seen in that area. So if we can go and compare it to what things were like before all of this industry, and we see that these days there's a huge drop in that size of that population or how far-reaching it goes, that's when we know that it's time for us to start thinking and taking action.
There are two things that you mentioned in that I want to link to other programs we've done in the past. So one of the best examples of sort of statistically looking at the change in bird populations we've ever had on is the very generically named but amazing Adam Smith. Joined us on the broadcast a couple times. If you go to our YouTube channel, again, at Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants, look up Adam's program. It talks about the change in birds from 1970. He actually was the lead author on this study that was sort of broadcast all over the world and made the news globally about how much we've impacted them. And my favorite example of counting ever was belugas from space. So basically they use satellites, and belugas are so white you can very clearly see them in the water. And so they scan like Hudson Bay, where they come around Churchill, Cumberland Strait, and you can count them. And so this is one of those citizen science projects that kids can do from home, is to look at these beluga populations and be like, okay, there's 300 here. And when you get a bunch of people doing that, you get a really good sense of their population, which is amazing and such cool stuff. Emma, like, kids these days have so many opportunities that we just did not have. Like, climate change is like a mild thing when you were talking about it as a kid. Acid rain was the big one, I remember. Everyone was all like, oh God. And then, there was nothing like this. So now if you go out, you can use iNaturalist, you can find species, you can do citizen science, you can learn about anything to any age level with these amazing resources. And so it's such a special time to be interested in this field. So, Emma, we could go all day. I could talk about conservation in Canada.
Absolutely.
Right? But we are nearing the end of the broadcast. Is there a final message you want to share with any of our kids about the work you do at Species at Risk, or how they can take action when they leave this program?
It's hard to think of one final message to leave you guys off with. So I will stick with the one that I kept trying to underscore over and over again in this presentation, that we have so many fascinating and awesome, cool, different species in Canada. And even if we don't necessarily know it at the time, they all play a role in the ecosystem. And so taking care of all of them and doing these small everyday acts that help our environment is important for not only all of these species in the ecosystems, but for the ecosystems and how healthy they are as well. And it can be fun. The world is a really exciting and beautiful place, and getting out to explore it can start in your own backyard.
I cannot think of a better message to end off a broadcast. Emma, it's been such a thrill having you. Thank you so much for being our first of the year ambassador from Environment and Climate Change Canada. You guys are doing such incredible work to protect our habitats, our species, and more. This was a spectacular broadcast, and I'll just say a big thank you and farewell to all our audience for joining us today on YouTube and beyond. Have a wonderful day.